Tonight, the Hawke Labor government returned to power.
That this will be a government for all Australians, not only for those who voted for us, but also for those who did not.
Good evening, Edwin Maher in Melbourne with ABC National News. In an historic victory, the Labor Party has been returned to power for an unprecedented third term, and it's expected to increase its majority. While counting will continue for some days, the government has at least retained its present majority of 18 seats in the House of Representatives and could win up to another 5. So far, the Liberals have 42 seats and the Nationals 19. In the Senate, the Democrats will maintain the balance of power. The Prime Minister, Mr Hawke, has renewed his pledge to provide a government for all Australians. The opposition leader, John Howard, blamed his loss on disunity in the Conservative ranks caused by the Queensland Premier, Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen. Margot O'Neill reports.
Despite a shock in the early stages of tally room counting, when Liberal hopes soared as strong swings emerged against the government...
Well, you might have had a suicide on ABC television.
It was clear by 9 o'clock the government would be returned. And just before 10:30, a triumphant Bob Hawke in Melbourne claimed his third victory, making him the most successful Labor Prime Minister in history.
This is a moment of pride and of gratitude.
The Prime Minister renewed the pledge made at his 2 previous election victories.
That this will be a government for all Australians, not only for those who voted for us.
And even paid tribute to John Howard.
I express certainly the appreciation of the toughness of the campaign which John Howard fought.
But he almost forgot his #1 fan.
And as I felt that arm coming around me, which I'm pleased to say has been coming around me now for about 35 years, there is, of course, a thank you that I should have made. And that's to Hazel.
In Sydney, a disappointed but stoic John Howard conceded that his bid had failed. But despite the bitterness of defeat, he struck a gracious chord.
We are about to enter our 3rd century as a nation, and whatever differences that divide us politically, and they are important differences, and they will remain important differences, those things that unite us as Australians are much greater and more enduring than those things that divide us.
Mr Howard congratulated Mr Hawke before also turning to his closest supporter.
Finally, I'd like to thank my wife, whose love and support over the last 6 months has been...
Then the recriminations, with Federal National Party leader Ian Sinclair quick to blame the divisive crusade of Queensland Premier Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen.
I don't think there's anybody else to whom you can turn.
But Sir Joh saw it quite differently.
I do not accept any blame. I never intend to and never have to. There's no reason to accept the blame. The only thing I blame myself for is that I didn't continue to go myself.
At last count, Labor has at least held on to 82 seats. The Liberals 42 seats and the Nationals 19 seats, with 5 doubtfuls which could go Labor's way. And in fact, some of Labor's biggest gains could come from Queensland, where party members believe there's been a backlash against Sir Joh.
And in the wash-up today, former Liberal leader Andrew Peacock was doing some private counting of his own and moving closer to a decision on whether or not to challenge John Howard for party leadership. Another senior Liberal Senate leader, Fred Chaney, also signalled future leadership aspirations by saying he might run for the deputy leadership and move from the Senate to the lower house. Through it all sailed a serene Prime Minister, as Kerry O'Brien reports.
In the Canberra tally room last night, Andrew Peacock was reluctant to go into the leadership issue.
I don't think it's appropriate tonight, and I'll give some considerations. But I'll also talk with John Howard.
But back in Melbourne today, he was moving closer to a decision.
I am considering that at the present moment, and I'll make a statement on that fairly soon.
With a Peacock challenge looming, John Howard today expressed confidence that he'll lead the opposition to the next election. He blamed coalition disunity for his defeat and showed no sign of regret about his policies.
I think our basic policy direction is correct, yes.
But Mr Peacock signalled spirited party room debate ahead on the Howard way.
The Joh factor didn't help, of course, the divisions between the Liberal Party and the National Party, but that, of course, was not the only factor. There were other factors as well.
Mr Howard clearly wants the man he sacked earlier this year back on his front bench, but would not necessarily serve a Peacock shadow ministry.
I will be having talks with Mr Peacock.
And would you serve in a Peacock shadow ministry?
Well, that's hypothetical.
In Brisbane, John Moore, another senior Liberal and Peacock supporter, called for more big guns in the parliamentary party and a better definition of issues.
We certainly need some more hitmen. We need some high-powered operations. We need to identify issues and relate to people.
Liberal Senate leader Fred Chaney confirmed his support for Mr Howard, but also signalled his own leadership ambitions by speculating about another attempt for a lower house seat.
The fact that from time to time I have considered a lower house seat. I considered it again within the last few months, and if an opportunity came at some future time, I might well take it up.
Another problem for John Howard, if he keeps his leadership, is the coalition, to be or not to be.
If one can be absolutely certain that it is a full-hearted, full-blooded, unambiguous coalition.
Meanwhile, the man who destroyed the coalition and undermined John Howard's hopes for the Lodge was back on his farm looking for possums.
Fuzzy, fuzzy! Fuzzy!
And still decidedly unrepentant.
Why blame me? Why not blame them? Why not blame them for taking so long to see the light?
As for the victor, he turned out on a chilly day for a family stroll through Melbourne's Treasury Gardens and yet another media event. He said again he'll at least see out his third term as PM. He'll continue the government's economic agenda. And while there'll be some changes in the ministry, he said last night that key economic portfolios would not change hands.
In regard to my major economic portfolios, I do not see any significant change, if any, in that area.
Three members of the Old Hawk Ministry won't recontest: Tom Uren, Senator Arthur Geitselt and Gordon Scholes, although caucus may create a few more vacancies of its own. In the final upshot, there may be more representation for the left, but no major reshuffle. On the other side, the headcount might be more dramatic. A Peacock challenge seems almost certain, although the numbers for change are not. And the sooner John Howard calls his party meeting, the greater the chance that he'll remain leader.
One election casualty was one of Australia's more colourful and certainly vociferous politicians, Tasmanian Michael Hodgman. Mr Hodgman, who'd held the Hobart seat of Denison for 12 years, was beaten by the ALP candidate, lawyer Duncan Kerr. Mr Hodgman needed only a small swing against him, and many senior Liberals are blaming his loss on recent decisions by Robin Gray's state Liberal government.
Willing to do almost anything for publicity, Michael Hodgman held Denison for over a decade. Last night he began what could be his longest suspension from federal parliament. It could last at least 3 years.
I won Denison with honour. Yep. I've held it with honour. Yep. I've lost it with honour, and I'm going to win it back with honour.
Yes, you did a good job.
Michael Hodgman may now display the traits of MacArthur, but this must surely signal the end of his much publicised prime ministerial aspirations. However, while Michael Hodgman is securing future votes and drawing the final curtain on the infamous Hodge-Luck duo, behind the scenes senior Liberals will begin the inquisition. Many are already blaming Michael Hodgman's loss on Tasmanian Premier Robin Gray. In his drive to establish a state bank, Mr Gray has alienated much of the southern Tasmanian business community in the heartland of Hodgman territory. Just days before the election, the issue had split the party, and Liberals are now saying the state government could have handled things much better and perhaps saved Denison. Recriminations aside, tomorrow Michael Hodgman QC will don wig and gown at the bar of the Tasmanian Supreme Court.
Meanwhile, Victorian Premier John Cain claims Labor's win last night paves the way for his own historic third term in 1989. But equally, state opposition leader Jeff Kennett says there's evidence of an anti-Labor swing in metropolitan Melbourne, which would deliver victory to the Liberals at the next state election. State political reporter Ian Henderson.
Whether they were celebrating or commiserating with their federal colleagues last night, Victoria's state political leaders were closely watching the returns for a clue to their own fortunes at the next state poll. The omens were so good, thought John Cain, that he was prepared to call the result 18 months before time.
We've never in this state been returned as a Labor government for a second occasion until 1985. We're going to be returned for a third, obviously, I would think.
Indeed, the Liberals' only likely gain in Victoria is the seat of Chisholm. But even there, Liberal candidate Michael Wooldridge has temporarily taken the champagne off the ice, and Labor incumbent Helen Maher is refusing to concede defeat. Still, State Liberal leader Jeff Kennett claims a 2% swing against Labor in city seats, which hold the key to the Keane government's fate.
I think our vote will be bigger than that. That is closer, if not better, than the vote we got only 4 months ago at Central Highlands. So even though it's been a fairly disappointing weekend for the Liberal Party, there is, as far as I'm concerned, a silver lining in a very dark cloud.
Part of that dark cloud is over the future of John Howard, a man with whom Jeff Kennett has had widely publicised disagreements in the past. But on that score, and despite his long-time bond with Andrew Peacock, Mr Kennett was keeping his own counsel today. Is it time for John Howard to stand aside for someone else?
You're not going to have me comment on those areas that quite clearly are not my responsibility.
While the outcome of most Victorian lower house seats will be known by the middle of next week, the final result in the Senate is not likely to be declared for 3 or 4 weeks. As Steve Letts reports, it's become increasingly likely that one of the major parties will pick up an extra senator. The Nationals unlikely to gain a Victorian seat, and the Democrats limited to just 1 member.
In the last Parliament, Victoria's contribution to the Senate was 5 ALP and 5 Liberal members, 1 Democrat and an independent. But the double dissolution seems certain to alter that balance. On rough estimates, the Australian Electoral Commission believes it will take 180,000 votes to get a quota for a Victorian Senate seat. Using that estimate, and with 74% of the vote counted, the ALP has 4.5 quotas, the Liberals 3.5, and the Democrats are still about 14,000 votes short of a quota. With 9 quotas accounted for, that leaves 3 up for grabs. Those positions will be decided by postal and absentee votes, as well as the votes of those who allocated their own preferences and avoided the single pick-a-box method. The Australian Electoral Officer for Victoria, Dennis Reynolds, emphasises that it's too early to make firm predictions, but he believes the minor parties are unlikely to pick up one of the 3 open quotas.
But the 3 will be allocated basically, I think, among the Australian Labor Party and the Liberal Party.
What about the Democrats?
Well, the Democrats have not, as I said, got a full quota even yet, based on rough figures. It's difficult to see on the figures, although it's highly speculatory on my part to say that they couldn't get 2 quotas.
An interesting sideline is Union leader John Halfpenny's Senate push. Although relegated to the difficult number 6 position on the ALP ticket, Mr Halfpenny has already twice as many first preferences as all the ALP candidates put together, excluding the number 1 John Button. Whether this trend pushes Mr Halfpenny up into safer ground above the ALP's number 5, Senator Barney Cooney, is not expected to be known for another 3 or 4 weeks.
We'll have more on the election at 8:30 tonight in a special program with Richard Carlton and Max Walsh, and they'll be looking at the election and its implications for Australian politics.